the statistics show that problem drinking in the legal community, based on self-reporting, is about double the general population. And since it's self-reporting, my guess is the number's probably higher. You know? I mean, it's easy to envision someone who would say that they have a drinking problem, or that, who don't admit to a drinking problem. So that number's probably higher. I doubt that anyone says that they have a drinking problem when they don't. So I think that's a solid number when we hear those statistics through various studies over and over again.
Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated. What if you could hang out with successful small and solo law firm attorneys, ask them about their successes and failures, their business strategies and mindset habits, then take an insight or two to guide your own growth in your practice? Each week, Steve Riley shares an in-depth look at how to work less while maintaining high client service standards, reduce your stress levels while growing your income, and find time to make changes when you are time-starved. Steve is a lawyer coach for more than 20 years and a former trial attorney. His goal is to provide strategies to help you balance your lives and grow your practice. Now, here's Steve.
Hey, it's Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. And today we have a unique one for you, one that is confronting, difficult to hear, but at the same time, very, very powerful. And so with that, today I'd like to welcome attorney Scott Spradley to our show. Scott, welcome to the episode.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. Good to be here.
It's great to have you here, and I appreciate the courage it takes. And you're a pretty fearless guy. It's one of the things I've learned about you already. It takes a lot to throw you off. Now, you've practiced law for 36 years, and you've practiced very successfully for 36 years. So let's talk for a minute about your practice before I pivot on you.
Sure. I am a native North Carolinian and came to Florida for college. I played golf and I got a golf scholarship at the University of Miami, and that's where I started. And I basically never left Florida. So after law school in Tallahassee, I moved to Orlando. I was with the Gray Robinson firm for quite a while. I started their bankruptcy and creditors' rights department. And then somewhere along the line, divorce came knocking on my doorstep, as it does for many. And so I moved to Flagler Beach, where my wife at the time and I had a second home. And my practice has been the same from the beginning. I have a mixture of bankruptcy, in which I represent debtors and creditors, and I have an estate planning practice. So that's the mix that I have had for a long time and continue to do that here in Flagler Beach.
So you have a great practice, but it's not your passion or vocation in life. And really, the reason I asked you to come on the show is to talk about your vocation, your passion, and the fact that you have been fighting a particular disease for a long period of time. So talk to me about your story, your passion, and what you're about.
Happy to do that, Steve. I am an alcoholic is one side of the story, but I've been in recovery for 15 years as of a couple of weeks ago. And that's the other part of the story. For me, I would say I probably was a problem drinker not long after high school, really, but it was socially acceptable. I found it a means to have fun, administer aid to my stress in life, whatever it may be at the time, and then didn't see a problem with it. But even when I began to notice as I got into my mid to late 20s, law school, more stresses, there became more drinking. And when I felt that maybe my drinking might be a little more than some others, is when I began to perfect the idea of drinking secretly in addition to drinking openly. So, in other words, I could be at any kind of a function where alcohol was around and have as good a time as anyone. But there would be some drinking before then, drinking after that. And to me, it was just, I didn't see I was creating any problems for anyone, including myself. So unbeknownst to me, I was really creating a pit for myself, thinking that I was actually helping myself. That kind of continued all the way past law school when I was working in Orlando. Then now I'm married at the time, and then I had a job at a big firm, lots of responsibilities. And so my coping mechanism was alcohol. And one thing about the legal community is alcohol is so prevalent in our social lives, probably more so than many, many other professions. It's accepted, it's just accepted. And so I was always able to blend in with the crowd, but I also was able to find time to drink on my own when the crowd wasn't present. But critical to everything I'm telling you, Steve, is that I still did not think I had a drinking problem. I thought this is just what, I needed to do to cope with my stress. And it wasn't hurting anyone. I had a good job. I was doing well. I felt I was a good husband and father. And so I convinced myself that life was normal for me. I just, living a sort of high stress lifestyle, that's something that came with it. And it just never bothered me.
Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing about it is that it's not like you were at a low end firm. You were at a high end firm doing high end work. And of course, coping with stress is something that you see a lot of lawyers have to deal with. What are their coping mechanisms? How do they cope? What do they cope with? And so that was a question for me. This was like normal life for you. You looked around, and did you ever question at that point in time in your life, like maybe I have a drinking problem? Or did you just say this is the way the world works?
My wife would point out on occasion, she was kind enough to let me know that maybe I was drinking a little too much here and there. But it really, I guess my mentally, I was so keyed in to the fact that I did not see any consequences. Therefore, it must not be a problem. The only consequence I had was that, having a wife who pointed out that, hey, look, you're drinking more, it seems, than you used to. I found these bottles, in the garage, things such as that. And rather than be a wake up call for me, that just made me a better hider. I perfected my manner of drinking, privately. But it truly didn't dawn on me that I had a problem. I just, in fact, if anything, I kind of deflected it back on her. When we became divorced, my divorce lawyer shared with me that her divorce lawyer shared with her that I had a drinking problem. And I was shocked, and I think my response at the time was, you know what? I don't have a drinking problem. But if I do, it's because of her. And, and I absolutely believe that to this
Well, it
day.
makes perfect sense. You're like,
Yeah.
I'm in a divorce. I don't have a drinking problem. I have an ex-wife problem, or a wife problem.
Yeah.
That's
And
why
that's
I'm
what it
drinking.
was. And it was even more delicate because she too was a partner shareholder at the Gray Robinson firm. And so she had the ability to have her eye on me more than was comfortable when all this was going on. So, and again, rather than react to it positively, what I did was just make it more secret. Looking back on it, it's like, how on earth was I able to miss all these signals and everything that was popping up, but I just didn't do it. And another thing, now that I've had a nice track record of sobriety and I can reflect on some of these things, and I said a few minutes ago that I had no consequences. Well, you know what? I did have consequences. I think it bore heavily on the demise of my marriage. I think I could have been a lot better lawyer and leader at Gray Robinson than I was when I look back on it. I think I could have been a better dad than I was because there was a lot of time that spent, drinking and nourishing that part of my life. When I finally quit, which was quite an accomplishment given where I was, someone said to me, and I realized it to be true. My relationship with alcohol was the longest uninterrupted relationship I had had with anybody or anything, in my lifetime other than my parents. Because from the moment I began drinking in high school till when I quit, it was over 40 some odd years. And so just the idea of finally quitting because I chose to, there was a bit of grief that goes on with it, like with losing any relationship. So all of that, when I look back on it, it was a chapter, not a chapter in my life, it was a book as part of, several volumes. And so I guess the thing that jumps out at me, talking with you and other lawyers who may be listening, is that this is not something that is unique to the legal profession. It just happens to be more pronounced. The statistics show that problem drinking in the legal community, based on self-reporting, is about double the general population. And since it's self-reporting, my guess is the number's probably higher. You know? I mean, it's easy to envision someone who would say that they have a drinking problem, or that, who don't admit to a drinking problem. So that number's probably higher. I doubt that anyone says that they have a drinking problem when they don't. So I think that's a solid number when we hear those statistics through various studies over and over again.
Well, it's like what you said. It was normal. You didn't have a drinking problem. And I think there's a lot of people that are dealing with other types of addictions as well as alcoholism, that it's not a problem. It may be somebody else's problem. Now, they could be a better father, better leader, better lawyer. But like you said, there's no serious consequences that they're dealing with. But for you, what was the tipping point? What was the thing that you said, okay, I have to shift after having this long monogamous relationship with alcohol? I'm breaking up, I'm calling it a day, and I'm moving forward. What was the tipping point? What was the thing that caused this momentous change for you?
I think it was about 6 or 8 months after my divorce. I had left Orlando. We had a second home in Flagler Beach. So that's why I wound up here, moved my law practice here. 6 or 8 months after the divorce, there was no single event, but I just remember waking up one morning thinking, feeling miserable from the evening's drinking before. And I remember thinking at the time, you know what? I'm drinking about twice as much as I did before. And now she's not here for me to blame, and I think that's kind of what started it. It wasn't a single event, but it was the idea that I gradually came to know that I'm drinking more at a time when I had placed blame on any drinking I was doing in excess on someone who's no longer a part of my life. So at that moment, I began to sort of read some materials, and as every good alcoholic does, I go on the internet. They have these tests, 10-question tests to see if you're an alcoholic. So I found one of those, failed it. Found another one, failed it. Found another one, passed it. Like, oh, okay, I'm not an alcoholic. But the circle kept turning, you know. And eventually I decided that, you know what, I'm not really not that happy anymore. I don't, without being married, now I had more free time on my hands, and I occupied that with nothing productive but with drinking. And so finally it just was so stark that I realized that this is enough. I don't need to continue to do this. So I attempted to slow down, and I was unsuccessful at it. For me personally, I finally just went to see an addiction therapist. And as many good problem drinkers or alcoholics do, when he asked me why I was there, I said, I want you to help me manage my drinking. And I really thought that was the solution, to manage my drinking. And I've come to know that counselors hear that all the time, all the time. And so I spoke with him. He asked me if I had a drinking problem. I'm like, no, I've got a lot of stresses in my life. I just need for it to be managed and rearranged and do it the right way. And so he said, okay, so are you a problem drinker? And I said, no. He said, all right, here's the first thing I want you to do if you're not a problem drinker. I said, sure, what's that? He said, all right, don't drink for 30 days and come see me. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. There's no way, I've got my stresses in life, I'm not going to do that. He says, but you don't have a problem with alcohol? Oh, no, no, no. I just need for you to help me out a little bit. So we talked a little more. And after about 15 minutes, this guy pronounced me an alcoholic. And I'm like, how dare you? You don't even know me. And to this day, I remember what he said, which was, Scott, I know you better than you know you. And no truer words were spoken. So this wasn't a one and done deal where I have a meeting with a counselor and now suddenly I'm free of alcohol. This guy actually gave me some homework to do each week to quote help me manage my drinking, and I did it. And the first one, I was seeing him weekly. He said, "Scott, here's what I want you to do." He said, "I want you to drink every other day, and don't drink every other day, and I'll see you next week." Well, I remember what I thought, which is okay. A week is 7 days. Let me figure this so I can drink 4 days and be off 3 days rather than the other way around. And I did. So the next day when I met him, he said, "Did you do it?" I said, "I absolutely did." And he said, "How was it?" And I said, "Well, it wasn't awesome because I would find myself drinking until the clock struck midnight. And then the next day would arrive. And by mid afternoon, I'm looking at the clock, waiting for it to go to green light go at midnight again. And then I would start and go through the day. And I said, when all's said and done, I probably drank 1.5 times drinking every other day for a week than if I drank every day. And he says, "All right, I'll go back to my original question. You got a problem with alcohol?" "Oh, no, no, I just need some help in managing." So we went through different varieties of that every week. One more of those. He said, "All right, this week I want you to just drink on the weekend and don't drink during the weekdays." And I said, "Okay." So that's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It was Monday Night Football. So it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I said, "No, that's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and Monday is not the weekend." So we had this negotiating going on. And while he's painting a crystal clear vision of me being a problem drinker, I'm just missing it. I'm just trying to negotiate with him and figure this thing out. And so we went on and on and on. And finally, after a few of these exercises, and I think about 6 weeks, he asked me again, "Do you have a problem with alcohol?" I said, "You know what? Maybe I do." So I thought about it for a couple of weeks. He gave me some readings and was really helpful to me. And finally, just said, "Look, there's one path for you to take here. You need to go to an inpatient treatment facility." I'm like, "Okay, as long as it's not a rehab." And he says, "Scott, that's exactly what it is." I didn't even know. I just wasn't educated in this thing.
Right.
And so I did. I took a couple of weeks to get someone to look after my practice and figure out what I'm going to do. And I still had it in my mind I was going to be managing my drinking, but just with a different crowd. And that's what I did. I went down to West Palm Beach to a place called the Hanley Center, which is very widely well known, respected series of treatment centers for the purpose of being there 30 days. I think 1 or 2 weeks in, after sharing with my counselor the same story that I was just going to want to manage my drinking, I finally understood that, for me, managing my drinking is going to be not drinking. And so for the second half of those 30 days, I became depressed, thinking that, okay, if I can abstain from alcohol, which is highly doubtful, but if I can, I'm going to be miserable because my life was flashing before me. And everything I did, alcohol was present, whether it was something fun, a social event, going to the ball game, whether it was, whether I was unhappy or angry, alcohol was there to comfort me, go to the bar, have a few drinks, feel better. And I began to think, what am I going to do? I've never been without it. And that was where the realization of if I don't drink, I'm going to be losing a relationship and I'm going to be grieving for the rest of my life. So, without adding any more of my story, I want to say, by the way, that's not true. I found out that after I came back into society, re-established my law practice, and did what I learned to do on how not only to not drink but to adjust my life. Really, I've never been happier than I am now, and then I've been for the last probably 14 years. And I say that after 15 years of sobriety, because the first year was a challenge. It was really hard. My sole goal was just to not drink on a daily basis. Not drinking and be happy, that was too much right off the bat. I just need to stop drinking and worry about it later. I would go to daily AA meetings. And, AA works for a lot of people, but there's no one path to drinking and recovery, but it worked for me. But I would go to a 5:30 AA meeting every day. The name of the group was the Happy Hour group, which was great. But when I would get out of there at 6:30, I live here in a beach community on the island, and every single block up and down the 3.5 miles of beach is occupied by these fantastic beach bars. They make great drinks. I know because I've drank at all of them. So I'd come out of those AA meetings at 6:30. I think I don't feel comfortable like going home. I live on the beach. There's liquor stores all over the place. There's 7-Elevens everywhere. And so I would go across the bridge back to the mainland. There was a big Target super center. I would go into Target. I would go down the very leftmost aisle and go down the aisle, then come back down the aisle and come back all the way to the end. Next to that was a PetSmart. I would do the same thing there. Next to that was a dollar store. I would do the same thing there. So by the time I was done, I would have used up about an hour and a half. And I get my car and go home. And that's what it took for me to feel safe. Now, to this day, I still feel there's probably some Target manager who was thinking, uh-oh, here he is again. He never buys anything. What's he stealing? But I did that for probably 3 or 4 months until finally I got a little comfort that I could actually leave the AA meeting and go home and not risk the urge to pick up a drink. So there was that learning curve, but as I began to learn who I am and learn what I wanted to do, then the obsession with alcohol slowly but ultimately diminished. I think it was probably 6 months after I came out of rehab with no slips that I was invited by my ex-wife, who, by the way, I'll have to say has been very, very supportive of me despite a bitter divorce. She's been very supportive of me throughout to this day. When I was down at the rehab, she brought our daughter, who was then 9 years old, down to see me every Sunday for the time I was down there. I wound up staying 2 months, but she brought her to see me. And that was very instrumental in my recovery, to have the one person who recognized my problem right off the bat and was very angry about it, to turn around and support me all the way through. So a few months after I got out, she and I both went to law school in Tallahassee. So there was Florida State was playing in the Gator Bowl. It was Bobby Bowden's last game, and so she thought, let's go to the game. New Year's Day or New Year's Eve, I forget which. And I thought, okay, I can do that. And it was hard. I'm sitting there in the grandstands thinking, I have never been to a football game without drinking before, during, and after. And it was jittery for me. It was really hard. And I still remember, like, when I'd leave to go to the men's room or to get a Coke or something, I'd come back and both my ex-wife and my young daughter are like peering down to see what I'm holding, or there was no reason to trust me at that moment in time. But just those little hurdles, one at a time, would occur as life just rolled on. So it was definitely met with lots of challenges. And, living life without alcohol was completely new to me. So it took a while, but I can easily say that in the last 14 years, I've never been happier. And it's because I'm living life honestly. I know that there's other healthy ways to cope with stress, both the stress in my legal practice, personal side. For whatever reason, I got involved in politics. I'm a city commissioner for the city of Flagler Beach, and they're even more stress. I would never have done that 1 or 2 years into sobriety. I feel comfortable doing things like that now. So there's a way out. And, the one thing that I come across on a daily basis is opportunities to talk to other lawyers who are having difficulties with alcohol or other substances. I feel that while there are many programs that target alcoholism and problem drinking, what I've learned about these programs over the years, including Alcoholics Anonymous, is they're just as applicable to every other addiction. It's the same principles, which are basically to admit that you've got a problem and then to take affirmative steps to remove the problem and to understand that. And I think this is the biggest thing for me. There's not a switch that you can just say, okay, I'm now alcohol free, so I'm cured. There's no such thing. I know many personal instances with others who have either a few days of sobriety or a few months or a few years or a lot of years, and then they go back out, as they say. And it's because they quit working their sobriety program on a daily basis. And if you don't do it, then you're subject to going back out. It's just not like in any other physical illness that you can do what's prescribed, take your medication, and you're done. It's always there. In fact, for me, this is just me personally. I cringe when I'm at an AA meeting or any gathering where there are folks in recovery and someone announces themselves and says, "I'm a former alcoholic," and I just cringe when I hear that, because that to me, that would be dangerous for me to say, because I'm just not ready to plant my flag there as if I've left that all behind. It's in the rearview mirror. But for me, I just have to get through this day. And I don't want to tell myself or have others tell me, well, now you're cured, because I'm afraid I would stop doing the things that I do to remain sober, and keeping, and understanding it's just too easy. It's too easy to slip back into it. I see it all the time. What I like to do is talk to groups such as this. I give talks to different sections of the Florida Bar on a regular basis. And the idea is that if I can talk enough and someone gets the message and it leads them to making some self realization that maybe there's an issue there and there's something that can be done, well, then that's a win for me. I just want to share what's happened with me, and there are others. I wasn't alone out there for sure.
And I'd say you're definitely not alone. And one of the things I did in preparation for this, and these numbers, these statistics, but there's two levels, or there's two topics I like you to talk about. One is shifting your coping mechanisms. But before we go there, I'd like people that are listening to this to consider that while alcoholism is probably alcohol is the most prevalent addiction, and one that you can easily see kind of cloaked and managed well in the legal industry. When I was a young lawyer in Tampa, one of the partners I worked for had just came out of a rehab center for cocaine addiction. Within 6 months, he was taking me to happy hours, and that was just normal that we would go Thursday and Friday night to happy hours to meet with clients and drink excessively. And it didn't seem abnormal to me at first, but after about 6 months of that, I was like, this is not normal. But I'm going to read off some addiction, and these are top 10 ranked, all right? So people can find these, and this list backwards and forward. But I want to talk about it so people can listen, because there's different types of addictions. There's the alcohol addiction, which you've suffered from and are conquering, not conquered, but conquering. Smoking and tobacco. Chewing tobacco is an addiction. Smoking can arguably be an addiction. Drugs. Now, drugs are both recreational drugs as an addiction and prescription. There are a lot of lawyers I know that have ADD, but the ADD prescription is managed by some really wonderful medications. And, one is causing a particular form of behavior, and how you recover from that by taking sleeping pills. So that's a very interesting one. Gambling is one that I see and I've dealt with personally with clients. Food addiction, and you can see this being an issue for a lot of people just by looking at them. Internet and technology. Now, this is an interesting one, because I see lawyers all the time in our program, Scott. They can't put their phones down. They can't step away from their phones. They can't get away from a screen. They're constantly attached to some form of screen. Workaholism. And workaholism is a beautiful one, because depending on who you talk to about it, what studies you look at, right now, I think the last study that I saw on workaholism is basically about 25% of the legal industry would meet the requirements of being a workaholic. And then, of course, shopping, video games, and pornography. So these are the top 10 by prevalence in our society. Alcohol is number one, smoking number two, prescription, and of course, drugs are number three. You said this a couple of different times. One of the reasons you drank is to cope with stress and to cope with life. And it sounded like to me when you're telling your story that one of the ways that you coped with not drinking immediately in the first year, which had to be brutal, was walking, not the beach, but Target, PetSmart, and I think Dollar General is what you said.
I did.
And you were using those as coping mechanisms. What if you can increase your net income by 10% without taking on more work, increasing costs, and without working longer hours? The majority of lawyers are tied to the billable hour as their pricing model. The billable hour is an untapped area for improvement. So as I look at trying to help you, other lawyers, grow their practice and increase their income, we have designed a new virtual workshop called Level Up Your Billable Practice, Unlock Hidden Revenue, and Maximize Your Time. It's happening on February 27th, 2025, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, it's a virtual workshop. You don't have to travel. You don't have to do anything other than protect the time. Now, the good thing about this is not just for you as the practice owner. We've designed this workshop that if you have anyone in your practice, whether it's a team leader, an associate attorney, paralegal, that bills by the hour, they can come to this workshop and up-level their game to improve their game. Now, remember, our goal is modest. We just want to see a 10% improvement out of this workshop. I'm personally leading this workshop because a lot of what I did in my practice, both as a coach and a practitioner, was billable work. My experience is that if you can just do 3 or 4 things to improve a billable practice, you can increase the net income or gross fairly significantly. So think of this as a 5-hour intensive training program for your law firm, an investment of both time and money to improve the outcome of your billable practice. During the workshop, you're going to learn how to capture every billable hour you work. We're going to talk about how to raise rates without losing clients. We're going to talk about best practices, how to improve efficiency, reduce time, and improve cash flow. So if you're a contingency fee lawyer, a fixed price lawyer, this workshop's not for you. This is just designed for lawyers that have a billable element of their practice. So if you got a friend that you would like to recommend that to, that's great. By all means, do it. So if you're ready to stop leaving money on the table or, have that leakage that occurs in the billable practice, you can either visit our website or you can register immediately from the link in the show notes, and you can save $100 off of it if you use the following code, podcast100. So let's make 2025 a great year for you by investing in your practice and kicking up that billable hour element. What other coping mechanisms have you developed strategically to avoid alcohol? And then I want to talk to you about how you've helped a lot of other people deal with their addictions. But what other coping mechanisms have you developed?
Well, for me, trying to be healthy, trying to focus on exercise and things like that, getting the right, correct eating habits helped. But and this is personal to me, I had an interest in photography. I have a nephew who's actually a professional photographer. So I talked to him a little bit about it, about how can I develop this interest? Because now that I'm no longer married and I no longer drink, now I have a hell of a lot of free time on my hands. And so I got involved in that. I went to Creality Art School in Winter Park at nights and took some digital photography classes. I had a professor who took an interest in my work. One thing led to another. And so photography is actually a second business for me. I have work in 3 galleries, one here in Flagler Beach and 2 in North Carolina. And so that's personal to me. I mean, you don't have to embark on that kind of a hobby necessarily, but for me, that occupied the time that I needed. So it was just trying to steer my interest into a different but healthy direction. And that's what did it for me, along with helping others in the recovery community. That takes a large block of my time, and I'm glad to do it. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do it. And while it sounds like, wow, what a benevolent guy he is, there's a selfish aspect to it, because when I began to tell others my story early on, that's not all that common. A lot of those who are in recovery and are successful at it, it's a deep, dark secret. And that's fine. I mean, to me, whatever your sobriety plan is, whatever works is what works. For me, now that I look back on it, I think part of my motivating factor for telling others my story was to be accountable. Because I was like painting myself into a corner. The more people I tell, the harder I'm making it for myself to change the path, and go back to it. So there was that little bit of selfishness in there, but it was there. And so I do, between my law practice, dealing with the city of Flagler Beach, attempting to have a personal life, then photography, but trying to get the word out to others and I'm not a counselor. I'm not an addiction therapist. All I like to do is say, look, brother or sister, if you think there's a problem, then explore that. And I can send you some materials or direct you to where you may be able to get some help if you want it. I know for a lot of people, and this is one of the problems in the recovery community, is that's having the realization that you have to want it for yourself. You have to want to stop and reboot and fix the problem. I know the halls of AA are lined with men and women who are sitting on the outskirts, not at the table, but around the edges with arms folded, looking down. And I know right away who they are. I know exactly who they are. They came not because they wanted to come. They came because they were sent either by their spouse or by their employer or by the judge. And the success rate of those who go to any kind of recovery meeting, not of their own accord, but because being sent there under the threat of losing a marriage, a job, or their liberty, it's not actually the greatest motivator to take it seriously. I've had some talks with a couple of local judges here in Flagler County and in Volusia County about the fact that it's automatic under certain circumstances that you're arrested for DUI. You have to go to 30 AA meetings and bring your sign-off sheet to the judge before you can get a break on whatever your penalty is going to be. And for me, it's good that people go, but it's not the best way to introduce yourself to the recovery community as a means of punishment. And that's what it is. It's punishment. You're being punished. You're going to go to AA. And the success rate for a lot of those folks is very low because it's delivered. The message is delivered that it's punishment when it's in fact a great tool, but so many people don't really understand that off the bat, and understandably so. The idea that there could be resources available is not the end of the story. It's a matter of how to approach those resources, how to use them properly, and it all starts with you wanting to make the change yourself.
Your story of sobriety to me sounds like a courageous break out of prison. When I listen to you, it sounds like you had no control. You had a normal life, like a practice, so to speak, of how to live. But it seems like that you had no real control over the situation, and the sobriety is what broke you free. Because everything from your current practice, which I think is a secondary practice, like your primary focus in life is helping people. Your political role, your photography role, which you have to tell me your website. Do you have a website?
I do. Go to spradleyphoto.com.
Perfect. So we'll put that in the show notes so you guys can check out Scott's website. And then ultimately, your commitment, it's your commitment to helping other people comes through in your voice. And I know before we started the episode that you've had judges reach out to you to talk to you specifically about trying to call or help other lawyers with what they perceive to be a issue, right? And so
That's yes.
yeah, you become a lightning rod, whether you like it or not. And judges call you and say, "Okay, I got this guy, I got this gal. Here's the issue. What do you suggest we do, or how do I handle this?" Because they don't want to turn them into the bar. They want you to kind of intercede. So you more or less have become by default a guardian angel for a lot of people, whether they realize it or not. So you've taken a lot of activities, and I like what you've done. You've made yourself accountable by creating a conversation that this is who I am, this is what I do, and this is how I do it. And you forced a habit and practice for yourself to try to do your best to keep yourself focused and away from the potential of relapse. And you've done it brilliantly, quite brilliantly. But is there anything you want to say before I shift the conversation on you?
No, and I appreciate the kind words, but I think for me, when I hear you say that, I was in such denial, and it's such a revelation to me to see that I've got to believe that there are others. Because it's one thing to recognize that you have a problem with drinking, and there are a lot of people who fall into this category, but decide, you know what, it's okay. I'm good. It helps me. It's my coping mechanism. I'm causing no harm. But there are many others like me that I wasn't even at that level. I didn't think I had a problem at all. I just thought it was natural to drink to deal with that. I didn't look at it as coping mechanism. I didn't think about it as, sure, in the evening, my stresses are diminished with a few drinks. That's what I knew. But what I didn't think about was the next day when I got up, all those stresses were there in living color, probably worse than they were the day before. So it's just a temporary means to go about it. And for me, the message of self realization is important. There are many who would fall into my category, which I would call high bottom drunks, meaning that it didn't take me to have DUIs or bar complaints to open my eyes. You really, in my experience, you have to hit your own personal bottom to truly want to be committed to stopping whatever the addiction you may have. For me, alcohol. And for some, it's a monumental event which occurs. For me, it wasn't. It was an accumulation of things. So that's why I call myself a high bottom drunk, because I didn't decide to not drink or try not to drink when I was in jail or had lost my bar license or something of those lines. It just sort of happened. So, so everyone's different, but I think common to everyone is that in order to have any chance of success at stopping the addiction, in my experience, you have to want it for yourself. You can't say, well, you know what? I'm going to make this marriage work. So I'm going to do it because she wants me to do it, or I'm going to do it because he wants me to do it. You have to want it for yourself. And I think that's the only reason I've been successful.
Why do you think it's so hard for people to reach that point?
Habit, for one thing, lifestyle, it's convenient. Alcohol, especially, it's legal, it's everywhere, it's accepted. And with any kind of event, it's part of it. So I think a lot of people have the same view that I did was, wait a minute, how do I go out with the guys on Sunday and watch NFL football and me not drink? There's sort of a peer pressure that you build up in your own mind that it seems to be something that would be a horrible thing to have to do, if not impossible. And it took me actually living that to see that I can do that. I can go and meet with my friends and watch football, things like that. But it's just, I think over the years, it just becomes ingrained. And since that is the coping mechanism that many of us choose to deal with stress and other things, it's like, oh my God, you take away the coping mechanism. What am I going to do? Well, I got the answer. What you're going to do is you're going to tackle the problem, is what you're going to do. whatever it is that's causing the stress, you're going to do it. You're going to roll up the sleeves and spend an extra hour at the office, because I learned pretty quickly. When I was told on the front end of this, Scott, in your case, you need to go to an AA meeting every day for 90 days. Like, that's impossible. I can't find that much time, an hour a day. And it's like, all right, how much time, Scott, do you spend drinking from when you start to when you stop? I'm like, well, all right, go to the bar, a couple hours, go home, a couple more hours. All right, now you're already at 4 hours a day. We're talking about swapping that for 1 hour. And so on the front end, it seems unattainable. But if you take some time and think about it, you're swapping hours upon hours of engaging in whatever the addiction is for a little time to be honest with yourself and abstain from it and have some self-realization about how that's actually better. And for me, it took a while. That first year, like we said before, the first year was tough. And during that first year, I saw many people go back out who had attempted sobriety. But that was probably good for me to see that. So I didn't take it for granted.
Yeah, it had to be brutal. It had to be brutal. That first year had to be brutal. The key to this, and I hope the audience hears that one of the primary things you're trying to recommend to people is to hit the coping issues head on. Like, you've developed new coping skills to prevent drinking, and you've developed new coping skills, new ways of being a more expressive human being through art, through service, through speaking, through leading your community as a politician. You found other ways of coping with anxiety, stress, and just life other than drinking. And the thing that a lot of people don't appreciate is that drinking is an easy default. Like, it's an easy default. It's something that you and I, it's a common cultural thing. Like, it's very common. And really the core of this is, okay, at the core of this is you're coping with something you don't know how to deal with. And whatever that thing is you don't know how to deal with is the dragon. Everything else that you're dealing with is a coping mechanism to deal with the dragon. So all the addictions that you and I just talked about a few minutes ago are coping. At the core of this, it's a way of coping with something. So what are some of the early warning signs that either you've seen in your life or you've seen coaching or advising other people, that where you're like, okay, this might be something that may point to an addiction or might be something leading to an addiction that I just want to kind of highlight or get ahead of for someone? Like warning signs, like, this is a red flag, pay attention to it. Like, if you see me doing something, you say, Steve, that looks like a warning sign to me, my friend.
For me, what I see and having conversation with others about when they have a realization that maybe there's a problem is that, in the example of alcohol, they drink according to the calendar and the clock. It's 5 o'clock, so it's time to drink, whether they want to or not. So the idea that you've now turned it into a means to combat stress and to incorporating it into your daily life, when suddenly you find yourself drinking when there's no stress to be diminished. It's just because it's 5 o'clock. And so that's one thing. In the case of alcohol, I know many, myself being one, I never really liked the taste of it. I just didn't really like it. I like the effect of it. And I say that because there are so many in today's society who are very involved and really enjoy wine collecting as a hobby, and it's really quite a cultural thing these days, and has been for some time. And it doesn't mean they're all alcoholics. It just means that that's something that it's a hobby that they do. But the line gets crossed when, the wine turns into having taste here and there, comparing this brand with this, to just consuming it because it's there. And so I guess, one triggering sign that I see often is just the putting the use of alcohol as part of your daily staple without regard to anything else that's going on. It just becomes a habit. And then I would say, for me, it's for those who've shared with me that they've decided they're drinking too much and decide to cut back. only to come back drinking as much or more after a short period of time. Because I've told people, I say, Scott, what do you think about me? I have a couple drinks at dinner, and then on the weekends I go out with my friends. I'm like, I don't know if you have a problem or not, but you're talking about it, so you may think that you do. Why don't you like not do that? See what happens. And then I've had friends who say, yeah, I just felt I was drinking too much, and I stopped for a few weeks, and I was fine. And even though these statistics of problem drinking in the legal community are alarming, still the majority of people don't have the problem. I don't screen myself off from those who like to have a drink, because it's very normal in our society. It's just that there are those of us who can't stop. There's an AA expression. There are many. A lot of them I think are silly, but they're there. And there's one that I know very well, and it says, "One drink is too many, and 100 is not enough." That has meaning to me. I know what that means. If someone said, "Scott, you haven't been drinking for 15 years. Why don't you have this one glass of Merlot, just one?" And and intellectually, that doesn't even make sense to me. Why would I have only one? Because the instant I laid my lips on the glass, I'd be looking around, all right, where's the next one coming from? I mean, I can't get my arms around the fact of having one. And so there lies the problem. So I run into people like that. We talk about it. At the introductory level, they'll say, I just like to have a couple drinks and that's that. But the more we talk, the more it comes out through their own words that, this is something that's highly ingrained. And yes, it combats stress on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's just because it's done every single day. And at some point, it's going to take the self realization to come that it's too much. There's a problem. But everyone's different. It's hard to say.
I like the AA quotes, by the way. I think some of them are pretty good. I've heard a lot of them, and I've seen a lot of them. While I'm not a member of AA, I do really appreciate, and I've studied it. Like I've studied the organization, I've studied the habits, I've studied how it's designed, because one of the core things I have to do in my job is help people implement positive behavior change. And so AA is a brilliant behavior change organization that deals with a very serious addiction, and they do it very to low to no money based on volunteers. That's a it's an amazing organization as far as its ability to help people cope with change. So I am stunned by the brilliance and the success of the organization, and I find their quotes very, very good.
Well, and there's one thing, Steve, you said that I think is really important, and I probably haven't mentioned it enough. And that's that this program succeeds because it's about behavioral change. It's one thing to stop drinking, but if you don't change the behavior that induces the drinking to begin with, you're setting yourself up for failure. There's the term, another AA term, dry drunks, guys and women who are out there that they don't drink, but they haven't changed their behavior. And now what you've done is you take someone who has some sort of problems on an emotional level, physical level, combined, personality level, that results in heavy drinking. And you just stop the heavy drinking, but you don't address everything else. Now you have someone that probably now the anger and the angst and all of that is increased. So that's why it requires not only not drinking, but also taking a deep dive, looking into yourself and figuring out what are the sort of things that have caused this to become a habit anyway, and trying to do what you can about yourself. And to me, that's as important as not drinking, and that's to work on the behavioral changes that are necessary to keep you from wanting.
That's why I love what you're doing, and that's why I love your story, and I love your commitment, because at the core of this, you and I are trying to help human beings change their life, but for different reasons, like for different reasons. And you're coming from one perspective, I'm coming from another perspective. And what I'm trying to do is help people reflect and look and say, okay, these are serious addictions, and these are vicious addictions. And at the core of all these addictions are your inability to cope with something going on in your life and being consciously aware that you can be at risk to some very, very scary addictions because of your inability to cope is really what I'm hoping you will make people aware of today. And that's really why I really appreciate what you're doing. I really appreciate the leadership that you're providing to the bar. I really am amazed that you never had your license at risk. I'm amazed at the story that you tell because there's so many lawyers I know where I think in my career, so I practiced, I did litigation for 10 to 12 years. I did estate planning elder law for 10 to 12 years. I've been doing this for, I think, 10 years, 12 years now, going on 12. I think I have a 10-year attention span, Scott, as I think about it, 10, 10, and 10, as I look at it. But as I look at it, during that time period, I've admitted clients, both business clients and, lawyers that we work with, to rehab centers. I've helped them recover from everything from burnout to alcohol to drugs to pornography to food. I'm trying to think of all the different things I've dealt with. Gambling, and some unfortunately have not recovered from gambling. But these are pretty serious things that once you're taking a brilliant human being, lawyers in the upper 2% of the population, intellectually, probably not so high emotionally, like our emotional intelligence is very low. But you put them into high stress situations and they don't have great coping skills. And I think it's one of the challenges that we have in law schools, one of the challenges that we have with the bar is that we don't teach young lawyers how to cope with stress quickly. And it's one of the things I'm grateful for that I had glimpses of when I was a young lawyer, had exposure to, but I think it's a very, very soft underbelly of our industry that we don't address well. Because what's the statistic that you were sharing before about problem drinking in the legal industry?
35%.
Yeah. So let's make that real. So that's 35%. So that means 4 out of 10 people listening to this could be classified as a problem drinker.
Yeah.
And when you go to bar association meetings, I'm sure that people kind of look at each other kind of goofy, like, okay, if it's not me, it's got to be you. Right. So,
Yeah.
and then these are also the people at the bar that night talking about your presentation, no doubt.
Yeah.
So, so as we start to wrap up, what resources, what advice would you have to share with a lawyer that's listening to you and saying, or anyone, quite frankly, anyone, Scott, I don't have a drinking problem. I really don't. I need help managing my drinking problem. Where would you send that person for help?
Yeah, it's it really depends on how far along they are in the realization that they need to manage their drinking or not. I mean, I always direct those who have a willingness to, as abrasive as it may sound to some, but go to an AA meeting. And some may be far enough along in their unsuccessful efforts to stop on their own that they may take me up on that. Most do not, though. So I usually point them to literature. There's no shortage of that. There's, other than a few books that are out there about telling you how to manage your drinking, which I don't steer anybody to those, there's no shortage of literature. And that's where I would start. I encourage people who are somewhere in my community, meaning between Jacksonville and Orlando. I'm kind of in the middle of that. I'm happy to meet with people, go have a cup of coffee or lunch or something like that. But I think really the literature and the understanding that there are so many out there who are supportive, of efforts, even in the background, and especially in the background and anonymously. So besides literature and trying to get someone to at least consider going to a meeting. I mean, it's called Alcoholics Anonymous for a reason. When I was first directed there after I got out of rehab, my first thought was, all right, I'm going back to Flagler Beach. I've never lived there and not drank. So that's one thing I have to figure out how to do. And then I'm told that I need to go to 90 AA meetings in 90 days. How am I going to do that? The first thing I thought was, well, I've got to go, I got to find a meeting in Jackson or a meeting in Daytona. I can't go, they'll know me. And when I told my AA sponsor that, he said, Scott, get a hold of yourself. Everyone who's there is there for the same reason you're there. So I got over that pretty quickly. So, but back to your question, Steve, I think just take a look. It's easy to find the literature, that talk about a program of recovery. And there's nothing bad that can come of that.
Well, if you could shoot me some links, I'll put them in the show notes. And then I got two things I'd like to wrap up with. Is there anything else that you want to say before we start to wrap up?
No, I'm just glad, everyone who has seen this, I hope that you've heard a message that will help you steer yourself to the right direction.
There are two great things about your story. And one of the cool things about your story, first off, I love the story about Alcoholics Anonymous because it's a brilliant thing. You're like, well, I don't want to go there. I want to go somewhere else where nobody will know me. And your counselor's like, no, that's where you want to go because you want everyone to know you. This is the crew that you want to be hanging out with,
Right.
which
Right.
it makes perfect sense. Like once you say it, it's like, well, it makes perfect sense. These are the people I need to know me. These are my people that I need help from. These are my people. You had a fascinating story that when you went to rehab, you had someone look over your practice for you who was a direct competitor. Talk about that for a minute, because that was really impressive to me.
Yeah, that was one in a lifetime kind of a thing. When I decided that I was going to, in fact, go to rehab, and that it would be 30 days, I thought, well, I've got a law practice here and I need someone to watch it for me. So Peter Hill, who was at the Wolf Hill McFarland firm in Orlando, which at the time was the preeminent Chapter 11 debtor bankruptcy firm in Orlando. If there was a Chapter 11 bankruptcy by a corporation, in all likelihood, that's who represented them. So I represented the banks. I was a Gray Robinson and represented all the lenders. So I got to know Peter, not initially as friends, but as competitors and on the other side from each other. So I reached out to Peter. I just thought that he might give me some ideas on how to watch my practice. He said, Scott, pack up your boxes of files, bring them to Orlando. We'll sit down with you for an hour, go through what needs to be done while you're gone, whether it's hearings or filing motions or whatever. I'll do it. I'll keep track of my time and I'll bill you when I get back. So I thought, okay, I don't have a lot of options here. Peter's probably a high dollar lawyer, but what else am I going to do? So I did that. Midway during my stay in that 30 days, I decided that I wasn't ready to come out in 30 days. I was terrified about coming to Flagler Beach after 30 days because I feel I didn't have the tools yet to do that. So I stayed for another 30 days. But the first thing I had to do was call Peter and say, look, Peter, I got some news for you. What do you think about another 30 days? He says, Scott, no problem. Here for you. Well, he did it. So I got out of rehab, and the first day afterwards, I went to Orlando to visit with Peter. We spent an hour catching me up on all my files, what needed to be done. And I brought my checkbook. He says, nope, don't want a thing. Happy to help. And for that, I mean, that was just the most incredible thing that I have ever seen from another person who, I was just trying to fairly compensate him and he would take nothing. And, for that, I'll be forever grateful to Peter. It was just, and that needs to be known that he did that and he did it well. And unfortunately, Peter retired 2 years ago. And within a month of retiring, he stumbled in his driveway, hit his head, and passed away.
Oh, that's terrible.
So just the whole deal, because I know how excited he was about retirement. But to happier times, he what he did for me was amazing. I'll never forget.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's an amazing story. I love that story. And I love that story for many reasons. But because you are now Peter Hill to other lawyers.
Yeah.
When you think about it, you're other lawyers Peter Hill. you're there helping other lawyers, not with their practices, but something far more powerful and far more precious, which is their lives, their livelihood. And so you may not appreciate it, but you're doing for others daily what Peter did for you for 2 months. Not that what he did wasn't remarkable, but what you're doing is very remarkable, Scott. It really is.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's just one of the things that I think part of it, Steve, is that I was so unknowing and the opposite of self aware of the harm that I was causing myself and others. That now that I can see it, I know that there are many others who are in my footsteps. That look, maybe you can do this before your marriage breaks off. Maybe you can do this before you get that bar complaint. Maybe you can do this before you have that DUI or get fired by your firm. So if I can help someone become self aware in that regard, and every day there's something else that'll pop into my mind about some warning signs that I skip through. Um, and that if I can help others avoid that. I mean, I know that a year or two after sobriety, I was talking to Susan, a former wife, and I thanked her, as I do all the time, for supporting me through sobriety when she had every reason not to. And I said, you know what, Susan, if I hadn't stopped drinking in 5 years, I would be dead. And said, no, 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 Scott, that's not true. I said, really? He said, no, you'd be dead in 1 year. So, you know, so it's just, so I was completely unaware of anything. And I'm talking with the person who was my partner, was aware of everything, apparently. But, it's just one of those things. So if I have an opportunity to talk to others, and if 1% or a fraction of 1% hear a message here that will help them help themselves, then that's a big win.
Or have them help somebody else.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're all here for, to support each other. So, Scott, thanks for your courage. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for the work that you're doing. And thanks for the authenticity. I'm very grateful for you and grateful for what you've done. And I know it's not been an easy road, and you get up and do it every day. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode could help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.